Hi, I'm Niloth. Let's get started on TUIs Simplified, transformation of TUIs into user-friendly tools. So I'm a Bichin who just completed my Google Summer of Code at Julep. For the last few months, I've been working with Julep Terminal, the official terminal client of Julep. It's built using the Python framework, Urwit. My work involves enhancing the user experience of Julep Terminal, especially in the area of hotkeys. In this talk, we'll start off by discussing how user-friendly TUIs have been and are now becoming. Then we'll discuss who can benefit from using more TUIs and end with how we can make TUI apps more user-friendly. Some people call it a GUI, I'm going to call it a GUI. When we say TUIs, we're talking about text-based UIs, sometimes also called terminal UIs. But we're definitely not talking about tangible UIs, as that's something else entirely. Though the terminal itself is a TUI, for the scope of this talk, we'll only be referring to applications that run inside the terminal as TUIs. CLIs came first, then came the GUIs that we're all familiar with, and then came the term TUIs. Yes, TUIs existed long before GUIs, but the term was coined later to differentiate it from GUIs. Now, all CLIs can also be considered as TUIs since they're text-based, but in this talk, we'll be discussing the modern generation of TUIs that are a mix of both CLIs and GUIs, the best of both worlds. I'm sure that most of us have our own notions of why we would prefer using a GUI over a TUI. They're hard to set up, what with lots of TUIs not running on, say, Windows without WSL. And you need to read and follow through multi-step installation instructions, and it's very common to run into errors while setup itself or while using the app, and one would need to go through forum discussions and documentation to debug them. There's hardly any in-app support. It's also very tech-heavy. I mean, how many of us can actually convince our parents or even our non-tech friends to try out TUIs? There's not much mouse support. They don't look very appealing, and they behave differently compared to the GUIs that we're used to. And obviously, they have limited multimedia and graphics support. They're just not GUIs, right? Let's go back one step. Let's have a pop quiz. How many folks here can actually distinguish between CLIs, GUIs, and TUIs? Are you ready? What do you think this app is? This is a recreation of Paint as a TUI app using the modern TUI framework textual. Yes, it has a normal menu bar, buttons, the paint board, and the color palette, all typical elements of a GUI, but it runs inside the terminal. What about this one? What do you think this is? If you thought it was a CLI, you'll be right. Technically, it can also be considered a TUI, but since it's just a command, we won't be considering this a TUI. What about this one? Yes, there aren't any graphic elements, right? Even if it looks colorful. So it's a TUI, it runs inside the terminal. Now that we've seen some examples of modern TUIs, let's go back to what we were discussing. Why are TUIs not popular? Now it feels like they're not as bad as they're listed here, right? Let's make some changes to this list by considering the recent evolution of TUIs. Let's start with the setup part. There's a TUI app called Harlequin. On their site, the first selling point that they mention is that it runs anywhere. Any operating system, any terminal, any machine. Now, were TUI apps always like this? No, don't worry, this is not the Mandela effect. Until as recently as 2020, this was very challenging to implement with Python TUIs. So let's cross that out. Let's explore the textual Paint app a bit more so that we can evaluate the features of modern TUIs better. So I want you to notice the footer and how it changes its text based on where the current context is, and the existence of the help menu. From the footer and the help menu, it's clear that it's now quite possible to have user-friendly error handling and in-app help. From how the UI can look very similar to GUIs, we can also agree that it's far more intuitive to non-tech users. And we just saw mouse support. But I wouldn't say that there's full mouse support yet. Let's just say that it's better and it's easier to implement mouse support now. The visual design is entirely subjective, but having said that, I want to remind folks that UI trends in general age pretty fast. So why can't we mimic the new UI trends? What's holding us back from making our TUIs look exactly like GUIs? You know how in CSS we use values like these? That's because GUIs allow pixel level control. In TUIs though, the atomic unit is a character. Sure, with Unicode we have access to symbols, shapes, emojis and whatnot. But still, the degree of precision of control is quite limited. For example, we just saw borders in the previous slide. How do you think we can draw borders in TUIs? Remember, we can only use characters. So we use these box drawing characters, a set of Unicode characters that exist just for this purpose. But again, as a user, you don't have to worry about this. It's the responsibility of developers to give the same user experience, but with a lesser degree of precision. These are some landmark frameworks and libraries that have influenced UI development in Python. We will be comparing some patterns between Urvid and textual. Next up, let's see who benefits from using these modern TUIs over GUIs. We don't have to do a show of hands for this, but if any of your answers is yes to the next few questions, you know what it means. Is your laptop a potato in disguise? Is your system on life support? Is your laptop fan trying out for the Olympics? Trackpad acting like it's in another dimension? Is your hard disk more packed than your fridge? Do you want to open still more tabs in your browser? Bandwidth slower than traffic during rush hour? Relax. No need to buy a shiny new laptop. TUI apps are here to save your day, your money, and give your device a second life. Now, we know how many of us can actually benefit from using TUIs. It's as if TUIs were just made for the Indian middle class, right? So what exactly do we get from TUIs? Apart from the mentioned resource efficiency and the performance, TUIs bring a large amount of control and customizability to the users, and they can be run remotely with SSH. We saw how modern frameworks make user-friendly TUIs possible these days. Next up, we'll discuss how we as developers can make TUIs user-friendly. And this way, we'll get to know exactly what UX features are possible and what's not. We'll be focusing more on hotkeys as it's one of the most important aspects of TUIs. Hotkeys are just a type of keyboard shortcuts that work inside specific applications as opposed to working system-wide. The terms are often used interchangeably. Traditionally, you could use TUIs only with keyboards, but now modern TUIs have mouse support. So how important are hotkeys? Hotkeys still remain a core part of the user experience due to their speed and efficiency. As developers, if you aim to build a popular TUI app with an active community, the one thing that you need is power users. And hotkeys are what attracts power users. So it's important to design and build apps assuming no mouse, enabling true keyboard-only workflows. Does that mean that mouse support is not as important? No, that's not true either. Mouse support is essential to keep your apps accessible. Let's see how we can map mouse actions in keyboard-only workflows. For left-clicking, just pressing enter or space should work. But how do we know where the current focus is? It must always be highlighted in all TUI apps like this. And double-click becomes unnecessary in TUIs. For mouse movement, we've obviously got the arrow keys and the Vim-like equivalents, but these are only for sequential movement, which can indeed be slow. So how do we support non-linear navigation? Let's see a demo of panel navigation in LazyJet. Here, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are used as hotkeys to switch between the panels on the left side. In this example, there are two panels, the direct messages panel and the stream messages panel. And the hotkeys P and S displayed right alongside them are used to switch between them. In this example, there are two views, streams and topics. Each stream has several topics inside it. So we focus on a single stream that we want to view, and then toggle to the topic view and choose the topic that we want. And for both views, notice that there are search bars, independent search bars, which we can switch to using the Q key. So now we've seen 3 different ways of using nonlinear navigation hotkeys: panel folding, panel toggling, and jumping to search bars. Scrolling is obvious. We can just use the same navigation keys. Right-click is actually better handled with the terminal. We can directly perform context actions using hotkeys, saving that one extra right-click. But there are times when we prefer having an extra layer to reduce the clutter on the screen. This allows us to create a separate namespace for the hotkeys, a separate context that is opened only when necessary. With the mouse, the context menu needs to open it exactly where the pointer is to minimize the movement distance of the mouse. But with content expansion, the focus is automatically shifted inside. In this example, we're pressing I on a message to view the message info panel. And in this message context, we can view links, code blocks, and spoilers attached to the message. Pressing enter on the links opens them. Pressing enter on the snippets copies them to your clipboard. Pressing enter on the spoilers reveals them. This way, we're able to add an entirely new contextual actions layer on top of these messages. With modern frameworks like textual, hover effects are now easily possible like we saw previously. But there's a difference between hovering and selection. One is passive and the other is active. So when would this difference matter? We'll see. How can we implement tooltips in the terminal? If the tooltips are small, like this, we can use the footer to display the tooltip. While this example uses the footer, any status bar can be used, typically located as a footer or a sidebar panel. For larger tooltips like this, we could do inline insertion, but it would risk disrupting the entire layout. We could go with a pop-up window that opens over the content. But this wouldn't be the same as a web app tooltip, because you would need to close it before proceeding, since the selection in TUIs is always active and never passive, and this is where that difference matters. Can we drag and drop in the terminal? Not as of now. We need a workaround for this, so we support 2 modes. We select from the select mode, navigate to the location that we want to drop it, and then drop it. Do you have a mouse with several programmable buttons? Don't worry, they can still work in the terminal as long as the app supports those functionalities, as they're typically internally mapped to keyboard hotkeys as well. And you can manually map your mouse buttons to any other custom hotkey combinations too. Mapping. In this section, we'll be looking at how we can improve the user experience of hotkey onboarding. First off, intuitiveness. Users must find the app to be just like all the other apps that they're used to. This involves using well-known hotkey sets like the GNU read line hotkeys, editor sets like the Vim Emacs shortcuts, and using standard hotkeys for common operations like clicking, quitting, help, searching, navigation, etc. also helps. Now, there's actually a trade-off to this. Let's say your app is extremely intuitive. A new person who just came across your app 2 minutes ago has access to all the advanced features of your app. Let's take a JIT client as an example. This new user accidentally presses a character key, and note that no other modifier keys like Shift, Alt, or Control are used in this. And this character key does some important operation that the user was not aware of. And now they have to go on a tangent and fix that. They'll become quite upset with your app and just never use it again. So preventing accidental hotkey usage is as important to user experience too. Here are some ways we can handle that. The undo operation, while it can seem easy, can be quite difficult to implement in some cases. So we need backup options like the confirmation prompts. Let's do an exercise. Let's go through each of these key combinations and identify how we can safeguard from accidental usage. Are you ready? So how can we safeguard from discarding changes? It's an irreversible operation, so we can use a confirmation prompt for it. But staging files, we could just unstage them, right? So an undo operation is quite feasible for this. Refreshing and fetching. These aren't even destructive operations, so it's fine to leave them unhandled. Pushing can be dangerous, but only sometimes. So it would benefit from splitting out force push as a separate hotkey that requires confirmation. Returning back to our list, there was one other option that we didn't actually explore. Now I'm hoping this reminds you folks of something that we previously discussed. Yes, it's focus-based content expansion. The same principle can be applied here. In these examples, a pop-up opens on pressing I for info. And as you can see, each provides a set of hotkeys that can be used only from this context. And since these are protected with an extra layer, it's fine to just use character hotkeys without using any modifier keys. Making a feature-rich TUI is one thing, but if the users need to go digging too deep to discover the advanced features, the features will be underutilized. We previously covered how power users are what drive a user community. And discoverability is what TUI devs can do to smoothen the user to power user pipeline. This can be done by making hotkeys visible and accessible, and by providing cues for learning and reinforcing hotkeys. So how do we display hotkeys in the UI? In the GUI, we know how menus have underlined characters that are used with Alt, and the direct hotkeys are displayed to the side. But when it comes to the terminal, folks typically depend on command usage help and the app documentation. But we saw that the user-friendly way is to have all your help, including the list of available hotkeys in-app. One strong benefit of that is that if the users remap their key bindings, the in-app help can reflect those and give targeted help for each user. And of course, we can use the footers or the status bars. These are some examples of various TUI footers. In this example, the same app shows a different set of hotkeys based on the context that is the current user focus. There are often too many hotkeys for us to be able to display them all in the footer, right? So one way is to use the ellipsis icon used here. What about contexts where there are no hotkeys available? In that case, we can use generic hotkeys like this one. Some apps also allow clicking on the footer to use a hotkey suggestion. Notice the F4 format query is highlighted here. It's because the mouse is hovering on that. This allows mouse users to use hotkeys without even using the keyboard. Isn't that cool? We could also choose a random hotkey from the list of hotkeys available for that context and display it in the form of a hint. In this example, the context is shown in parentheses. We could display the same hotkeys in a variety of ways. We could use symbols like these, try different capitalization. It's a trade-off between space and clarity. That would depend on the layout of the app. We could also display hotkeys in the buttons, the search bars, and panels as shown before. Or we could display them like this. This is a Notes app built using textual. This is an example of how help menus of popular TUIs used to look like. As you can see, they're not exactly grouped. This is a more modern example. There's a bit of grouping here, and notice how it lists 41 entries in this help menu. This is ULIP Terminal's help menu. One difference is that this has much more hotkeys than either of the previous lists. So categorization becomes absolutely necessary. Remember mapping mouse actions to keyboard inputs? Well, here is one other way we can implement scrolling. Instead of navigating entry by entry, which is also possible here, we're navigating category by category. Notice how each category title aligns up perfectly at the top there. This wouldn't be possible if we were just using something like page up or page down. This needs manual implementation. Writing help entries is an art form. It's easy when you don't have a lot of hotkeys, but as your app grows, organizing them uniformly actually becomes challenging. But how challenging could it possibly be? Let's see. Here are some different ways we can classify hotkeys. We could group or sort hotkeys by where they can be used from, which is the context, or what they do, their functions, or by how related they are, or by the difficulty of learning and the frequency of usage. We could sort them by the keys that they are composed of, and we could filter them by whether they have been modified. While we could choose one of these axes for a help menu, we could also allow sorting by all of them and filtering by the last entry in this list. That's it about displaying hotkeys. Now, how can TUI devs help users learn hotkeys? Remember the footer hints? We could cycle them. We could allow the user to go to the next hint manually or automatically cycle through hints on a periodic basis. This allows users to control and customize their hotkey learning process. It would be even better if we could dynamically generate footer hints that are tailored to each user. For example, this hotkey goes to the next 100 topic. Only suggests that if the user has any 100 topics, otherwise don't. Another example, remember when you saw the toggling between streams and topics and both had their own search bars? Well, use the hint that applies to the current panel. Now, how do you actually determine the context? For that, let's look at how TUI frameworks actually work. TUI frameworks typically use an event-driven architecture. The producers in TUIs would be the keyboard and mouse inputs. The main event loop will serve as the event broker, and the consumers will, of course, be the widgets. And the widget hierarchy is a tree as well, and it has the usual bubbling and capturing of events by the widgets. With that info, can you guess how we'd find the context? Yep, the framework will maintain the path to the focused widget in the widget tree. For example, this is a sample focus path in Urvid, where the numbers represent the indices. Each entry in this tuple represents an edge in the widget tree. And this path in particular represents the stream or topic button in Julep terminal, while this path represents the user search box. And this is how we map the focus path to the context state. Coming back to hotkey onboarding, let's discuss how we can actually choose footer hotkeys to use as hints from the list of all possible hotkeys in a given context. Here's one way that we're exploring at Julep terminal. We start with assigning priority levels to hotkeys, depending on how easy to use they are and how often a user would need to use them. Of course, this is quite subjective. Next, we track the hotkeys being used by the user, locally of course. And we use an algorithm that only generates hints for hotkeys that are rarely used by the user. This way, the hints would remain relevant to the users as they grow more and more familiar with the app. And we could now make in-app tutorials for TUI apps. I haven't implemented this, and I wasn't able to find any TUI apps that have this feature. Maybe one of you folks can be the first to implement an in-app tutorial in a TUI. We're done with the discoverability aspect. We covered some of the external consistency aspects as part of intuitiveness. Let's look at some examples of internal consistency now. While these words are different, we can see that they mean the same thing. But this one is far from obvious that they mean the same thing. So when it comes to features that are unique to an app, consistent terminology becomes essential. Lots of hotkeys do operations in the background and show no visible difference, in which case it becomes helpful to give user feedback using confirmation sounds or by flashing the footer like this with a success or an error message. We also need to make sure that all hotkeys work and are displayed appropriately in different platforms. For example, Julep terminal uses a different hotkey for selecting text in macOS because the native terminal there captures shift. Hotkeys can be remapped typically using a config file. Now it's easier to do it inside the app as well, like we saw previously. But config files still remain relevant, as you can share the config files around across devices, different profiles, and back it up. It's also easier to implement. To implement disabling of hotkeys and switching their behavior, all you need to do is allow hotkey functionalities to be unmapped. Let's finish with an example of a layout. Here's a layout that is used in Julep terminal. Note how both the side panels are collapsed. It's called the auto hide mode that is targeted for users with smaller terminal windows. So in this talk, we've explored the evolution of modern TUIs, their advantages over GUIs, their potential in the Indian user base. I hope you're excited to try out more TUIs. We also touched upon key Python frameworks and the architecture, and how embracing user-friendliness works as a community-building strategy, and various hotkey onboarding tips. I hope this inspires you to try and create your own TUI applications. Thank you all for being such an attentive audience. Your presence here today is greatly appreciated. My utmost gratitude to the PyCon organization for providing me this opportunity to spread the joy of TUIs. And before we go to the Q&A, I just want to mention that we're having a dev sprint on Monday for Julep and Julep terminal. So if you're interested, please register yourself. And it would be very helpful if you could actually set up the dev environment before the dev sprint, especially if you want to contribute to the Julep repo, because it involves some large downloads. We can go to the next questions.
Yeah, folks, if anyone has questions, please come there. You can make a queue there, please. That helps us manage it well.
Hello, good morning, sir. You told about categorizing the TUIs, all the options. What I was thinking is, can we implement a search functions inside the, along with categorization, can we include some kind of search functionalities also? And if we do that, how are you thinking to go about building that TUI?
Yeah, searching works exactly the same as it would in a GUI. So only the UI part is different, right? So the backend would work exactly the same, and with even with older frameworks like Urwood, we could implement the same search functionality. And there is also when we enter character by character, it works dynamically. So it's always been a feature that's available.
Okay, and one more question. Going through the app which you showed, that's currently available in web applications, which you wanted someone among us to be the first one to build in a TUI. Are there any ideas related to that? Because there are no pop-up kind of options in TUI, because everything would be in the terminal itself.
Yeah, pop-ups are available, but that one was the in-app tutorial, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So in-app tutorials, that is similar to the thing that we mentioned in the tooltips. So they can just pop up as a window.
That would be in the footer or something. I wanted something which is exactly right alongside the text which it's displaying or it's highlighting.
Right. Hovering is not possible at this moment. Like hovering, you can do hovering, but the tooltip again, it doesn't work in the web apps. It works the same way in the web apps.
Yes.
But yeah, that's the difference between active and passive selection, right? So that's not available at the moment. We have to use a full pop-up that you actually have to click on to proceed to the next step. So that is actually, as a typical in-app tutorial typically involves clicking on next, go next, right? So in that case, the in-app tutorial works exactly the same in TUIs.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with Wimperator and Tridactyl in a browser? I can hit a shortcut and it's all the links and buttons will have highlight buttons. So instead of clicking something, I can just press JJ and it will click a link. Is this pattern available in TUIs? Because I don't want, because I will have a hard time managing to learn the shortcuts of multiple apps, and I don't want to configure.
Yeah, actually, I didn't get what is the exact feature again? You press. Can you please repeat that?
In the browser, if I press a button called F, it will every link and every button it will be highlighted with a shortcut.
Oh yeah, like the one that the notes app that I showed, it shows the at the corner of the thing, it shows the hotkey, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll just go back to that slide. Just a moment. This one.
Right, but will it show the clickable targets as well?
Yeah, we could actually implement that. This one's it's always displayed. You're saying a toggling thing, when you press F, it shows that. So we could do that. We could implement that totally.
Also.
And yeah, of course, clicking on that would work.
Oh, okay.
It can be done. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And all these patterns are they implemented in a framework, and have people made components like that?
The last word I didn't get you.
Have they made for example in React they make small components, right?
Yeah, right.
So have people made components for these functionalities?
Yeah, there are, of course, compared to React, the number of components available will be pretty limited, but there are components. Especially if you go back to older libraries like Urwood and stuff, there are lots of GitHub repositories that make their own components and put them up on GitHub.
Okay. So a status bar could be a...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really awesome talk. As a token of appreciation, we have a small bag for you. Awesome. We'll start in 10 minutes with the next talk.